pain is suffering, we could come to the conclusion that this suffering wouldn't happen unless we believe to be a separate entity. In one sentence, there is only one reality, that which exists by itself, which doesn't depend on any other agent for its own existence. If death is the disappearance of consciousness, consciousness cannot experience death. The body of consciousness is the universe. The ego, as conceived as such, is a myth. It has never existed. So you cannot kill something which doesn't exist. Avidya. It means the ignorance of the true nature of consciousness.
Francis, it's an honor to have you with us today. Your work has touched so many of us, bringing the clarity and depth of non-duality into a form that speaks directly to our everyday experience. Welcome to the show. Francis, I would like to start off this discussion by asking you if you can describe the essence of Advaita Vedanta in the simplest possible terms and how non-duality relates to everyday experience.
In one sentence, it is, there is only one reality. And by reality, I mean that which exists by itself, which doesn't depend on any other agent for its own existence. And therefore, that which has always existed, which is existing right now, and will be always in existence. So there is only one. That's the meaning of Advaita, not two. Advaita, right?
Yes. And my second part of the question was, how does non-duality relate to everyday experience?
In fact, there is no other experience than non-dual experience. So that's how it relates, is that our real experience is non-dual. Our alleged or the interpretation of our experience is that there are many things, that there are many realities, but we never experience more than one reality.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Beautifully said. I'd also like if you can elaborate on the difference between observing the mind and disidentifying from it, because the mind is essentially what amplifies most of our suffering and negative emotions.
Yes, but before I answer this question, we have to agree on what we mean by mind. What is the meaning of mind? And let's go back to our human experience.
Mm-hmm.
Our human experience is comprised of 4 categories. There are 3 phenomenal categories and 1 category which is not phenomenal. So let me expand on that. The phenomenal categories are whatever we perceive, that which we perceive. And the 4th category is that which perceives. So that which we perceive, the 3 categories are that which we perceive through our thoughts, our dream, our concepts. The second category is that which we perceive within our bodily sensations, our feelings, our anger, our aggression, whatever. And the third category is what we perceive through the senses, what we hear, what we touch, what we see, and basically that's the world, right? That's the world. So these are the 3 phenomenal categories, and the 4th category is the reality that perceives the three other categories. And the reality that perceives, I call it consciousness. So that's my definition. In other words, it's very important because most of the time when people use the word consciousness, they mean the content of consciousness. They mean the three categories. So the three categories that comprise our human experience is what I call mind. In other words, so that we don't talk apples and oranges in our conversation. My use of the word mind refers to that which is perceived objectively, the three categories. Our perception of the mind, of the intellect, our perception of the world, our perceptions of the body. That which perceives is consciousness. And moreover, we have to come to the conclusion that consciousness, that which perceives the mind, is real. Because let's assume for the sake of the argument that consciousness is not real, then how could something which is not real perceive any reality? You see? So if the consciousness that perceives is not real, nothing is. The word real, everything, anything goes, so to speak. So if we use the word real in the meaning I have defined already, that which exists in and by itself, that which is not an illusion, we have to admit first that consciousness is real. Because consciousness is that through which we know everything we know. Okay, so that's my definition of the mind, and it's in contradistinction with conceptual definitions of the mind that define the mind usually in terms of functions. That which can calculate, that which can elaborate plans for the future, have projects, etc., etc. And I am not saying that this classification, this definition of mind is useless. That's the one used in psychology, that's the one which is used in neurosciences, etc. It has its own use, it's at its own field or scope of validity. But for what we are interested in here, this doesn't apply because this mind remains a concept. You see, to see the mind as in electronics, we have a series of black boxes, right? And to see the mind, each black box has a function. To see, and that's interesting, but it is not experiential. That which the mind I'm talking about is the one we experience, and what we experience in this moment, we hear, we see. We hear sounds, we see stuff, etc. So that's the mind, our perceptions.
Mm-hmm. I'm so happy that you explained this for our audience members. This is some of the questions that we always get on our videos. And, another question, because you did mention suffering, and a lot of our audiences, they ask about suffering because they are coming to watch a lot of these videos because of some sort of suffering that has happened in their life. I would love if you can elaborate for our audiences on how does the path of non-duality, in your words, transform our relationship with suffering, and in what ways does it does recognizing the illusion of separation lead to true healing?
Yeah, there is a distinction to be made between pain and suffering. So we should, or pain, of course, pain is suffering. But pain, physical pain in the body, is not the only kind of suffering. There is another kind of suffering, which we could call psychological suffering. So, whereas physical suffering is what it is, it belongs to the body. Psychological suffering is optional, and for the following reason. it is that every time we can verify that through our own experience, that every time we experience psychological suffering, if we investigate its origin, we could come to the conclusion that this suffering wouldn't happen unless we believe to be a separate entity. Mm-hmm. And by separate entity, I mean a limited, body-dependent, separate consciousness. That's what I mean by a separate entity. We believe to be something separate from the rest. So and that every time we experience suffering is because of that. For instance, a fear of death. That's a big ticket item, in fact. Yes. Fear of death. It's because we believe to be a fragment. We believe that this consciousness, which is hearing these words right now, is dependent upon the body. The body was born and is going to die. In fact, it dies from moment to moment. In fact, the body started dying the day it was born, right? Yeah. We are in the process of dying. The body is in the process of dying. So it's not that bad, you see? So, but the problem, the psychological suffering, begins when we believe that we, as consciousness, are dependent upon the body and that we are going to die, you see? And then that creates all kinds of mechanisms of protection, which in fact are unpleasant and deprive us from the joy of being alive, from enjoying, this extraordinary gift which we have to have access to the world, to people, to flowers, to mountains, to breathing. You see, it's the simple enjoyment. What money can buy has nothing to compare with the natural gifts of the world. Even if you are a billionaire, and let's say this billionaire gets COVID, and cannot breathe, you see, he would happily give all his billions for the simple pleasure of breathing. And he said, so, and the same thing, every morning you see the trees, you see the sky. We don't realize that it's priceless. But among all these three reasons to be happy, to enjoy the world, like the sky, the light, the sunrise, the water. Remember when you were a kid? I remember when I was a kid, it was just after the war or during the war, and there was kind of in the street a pipe going up and with a tap. And we were running the water out of the tap and making mud with it. That was the most extraordinary thing we could think of. You see the water running, the mud, this simple thing. But among the gifts that we receive, that we forget we have them, like breathing, or being able to see, being able to hear. There is one which is even more precious. It is being conscious. We take it for granted. You see, we take it for granted. And that's the thing. But in fact, it is the one we are the most attached to. And the reason we suffer, going back to psychological suffering, we suffer because this gift we believe is going to be taken away from us at some point. You see? And that's a root cause of psychological suffering. Because the people would say, okay, I broke up with my boyfriend or girlfriend, and that creates suffering. Well, the reason I experience suffering, in fact, is because I felt that this relationship was necessary for my well-being. It was necessary for my staying alive.
Yeah.
You see?
Exactly.
And
Yes.
so all the fears kind of can be traced back to this fundamental fear of absolute disappearance.
Yes.
Once this fear of absolute disappearance disappears, then life becomes more of a celebration. And this liberation from the fear of absolute disappearance is precisely what in the traditions is called the liberation. Mukti for the Indians, right? Mukti is liberation. It's a liberation from the fear of absolute disappearance. It's a revelation of the reality and therefore of the eternity of consciousness and of the identity of consciousness with the reality of the world. It's like Atman equals Brahman, they would say in India, the fundamental equation of Advaita, of non-duality.
Beautifully said. And I'm so happy you mentioned that fear of disappearance that we experience. And since you touched upon the concept of death, I know a lot of the viewers are curious about death because generally we feel that fear of disappearance, as you mentioned. Would it be accurate to say that death doesn't truly exist if one identifies as Turiya or pure consciousness?
When we ask the question, does death exist? We have to, for whom? If we determine that I am the body, yes, the body is going to die, but the body dies from moment to moment. If we feel that we are the mind, manas. If we feel we are the mind, it's the same. The mind dies with every thought and gets born again with every next thought. And the interval between these two thoughts, you are still there. You are still there as a presence. This interval is a four stage, a turiya. You see, in this interval, you go back to your true nature. So you never die. But going back to the question, who experiences death? The body cannot experience death because the body is dead after death, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. The body can experience suffering before in the dying process, yes. And as I said, we are dying already. The body is dying already. So there is moment of suffering. There are moments of pleasure, right? In this process. So there is pleasure, suffering, pleasure, suffering, pleasure and pain in the process of the body being alive. But consciousness cannot experience death. Because if death is the disappearance of consciousness, consciousness cannot experience death. Right?
Yes.
On the other hand, if consciousness survives death, it can experience the death of the body, but in order to experience the death of the body, the consciousness has to survive the death of the body. In order for consciousness to experience the end of the mind, consciousness has to survive. So people who believe that death is an experience, we have to ask for whom?
Yeah.
Therefore, consciousness doesn't know death. It is an impossibility for consciousness to experience death. So people who are afraid, they are afraid of their own imagination that after death, because they have been bad boys or bad girls, they are going to hell and they are going to be roasted for eternity. Or they believe that they are going to be reborn as a cockroach or something like that, and that it's not fun. So all of that in their imagination, right?
Yeah. No, no, beautifully explained. And now, Francis, let me just put you on the spot here. If someone comes up to you and directly asks you, Francis, what must I exactly do to awaken? How would you respond, especially when doing seems to contradict non-doing? And please feel free to elaborate on this as much as you'd like.
Well, um, we would have first to define awakening. What does awakening mean, or liberation? So I have already explained that awakening is the liberation from the fear of death through the experience of our eternity. And so then it boils down to, how do I experience my eternity?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is, you are already experiencing your eternity. It's just that you believe that the interpretation of your experience is that you are something impermanent. And therefore, yes, the body is impermanent. Any material object in the world is impermanent, even the mountains, even the earth, even the galaxy, even the universe, all of that is impermanent, right? Your thoughts are impermanent. They move at a much higher frequency than the universe, right? But so everything we experience in the mind stuff is impermanent. How do you know that you, as the fourth category I mentioned earlier, as the witness of the mind, as the consciousness, how do you know you are impermanent? You see? And then we have to come up with answers. And that's the beginning of an investigation. I cannot do the so-called teacher, which is in fact just a friend, right? It's a human being like any other human being. And even with the teacher is not perfect. There is a beautiful poem by Sayyu Manavar, who is a 16th century Indian poet,
Mm-hmm.
in which he compares the teacher, the guru, with a deer that the hunter sends to the herd of deers. And so this deer then takes all the other deers to the hunter so they can kill them. But the deer that attracts the herd to the hunter is a deer like the other deer. That's the physical guru. The physical guru is not the hunter. It's just the deer who helps the hunter catching or killing the ignorance in the.
Oh, wow.
You see? So, yes, so I've lost the track of what I was saying, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, a beautiful poem, by the way. Thank you for that example. I wanted to ask you, according to you, does free will truly exist in any meaningful sense if we are not the doer and consciousness is only that which is?
It's a tricky question, because on one hand, we feel, well, I am free of my decision. For instance, I'm going to raise my arm. Okay, I raise my arm. So
Yeah.
I decide to raise my arm. That was my decision, and so I have this freedom. But I cannot look at the mountain and say, mountain, start walking. I can give this order, but it's very unlikely that the mountain is going to start walking, right? So we make this distinction because we believe that this order of raising the arm comes from here, from this body-mind. And that this body-mind has the autonomy to create this order. But that's a common belief. So we have a freedom, but it's a limited freedom. We can decide to raise the arm, but we cannot decide. But the real question comes then. Do we choose our thoughts? Or do they come to us unchosen, like the weather? For instance, can I choose my next thought as a separate entity? You see? So, no, because I don't know what my next thought is going to be.
No.
You see? It's not like I go to the Costco of thoughts, and say, okay, among all the items that are available here, I'm going to pick this one and go to the cashier. No, it's not the way it works. The thoughts, they come to us unchosen. So the freedom to choose and to decide is not real. You see? In fact, if my thought come to me, just as the rain come unexpectedly, I don't choose my thoughts any more than I choose the rain. You see? No. So on that level, if I say I don't choose the rain, I have to be logical. I have to say I don't choose my thoughts.
Wow. No, that really makes sense, yeah.
And so, but on the other hand, I have this feeling that the thoughts, they come to me, they are mine, they are made of me, like the child is made out of the body of the mother. They are my children, right? But I don't feel that the rain is my production, is my child. Why? Because I believe to be this body and not this world. Whereas then I have to investigate, why is it that I believe this to be my body, right? And that out there not to be my body? Why is that? Because I seem to be able to generate, to control some elements of this body and not other elements in the world, which is not completely true. Because when I drive, somehow through the instrument, I control elements in the world. So I have this body as an instrument acts also in the world. And also within this body, there are many functions that I don't control. I don't control the beating, my heartbeat. I don't control my digestion. I don't control my immune system. There are many functions. So this control I have on my body is an illusion, and the lack of control through this body on the world is also an illusion, because there is some element of control of the world. But the fundamental question is, why do I believe to be this and not that? Where do this separation come in? Why do I believe to be this body? Because in fact, both this body and the world are appearing to me as consciousness. Right? They're appearing to me in the same way, in fact. They're appearing in the same space, if you will. So the choice that I make to be this and not that is kind of arbitrary. When I was born, on the first day of my life as this born infant, the world was me. I wasn't making this distinction. Then I learned how to navigate in this world. I learned how to evaluate the distance. I can see that I can grab this object, but I cannot grab the moon, for instance, right? No. So this sense of this body, and So I developed this these skills that enables this body to survive, to grab the fruit, not to bump into an object. So, but these skills are useful for the survival of the body, but they are not designed to tell us the reality of what we are, you see? They require skills, but we could say in a scientific perspective, in a Darwinian perspective, that they are the result of the evolution, and the evolution is just about the survival of the species, is not really about the reality. So that's why we shouldn't be blindsided by these elements of our perception that are not designed to tell us what the reality is. We need to go beyond them. We need to put them between parentheses, so to speak, and see whether we can go deeper. For instance, in the sciences, that's what we do. The physicist knows very well that on the quantum level or on the cosmological level, things are not the way they seem to be. On the cosmological level, time and space are not separate. There are strange phenomena that happen that seem impossible to us. For instance, the time doesn't flow at the same speed depending on the gravitational field. On the quantum level, it's also different. We cannot say that an object is here and not there. The object can be here and there at the same time, for instance. Well, this is a way of formulating which I'm aware is not really accurate, but I'm trying to convey. That should give us some. I'm saying that so that we can take our view of the world and this separation with a grain of salt, that we don't take it for granted that I am not this out there, that I'm just... Because if we think about it, this body is part of the universe that surrounds it.
Yeah.
It is made of the same electrons, quarks, gluons, etc., as the rest of the objects around it. It constantly communicates, exchanges information, exchanges chemicals. So it is very much part of the world. So it's only logical and normal that the reality of this body and the reality of this universe is the same. You see? And so if I feel that my reality is the reality of this body, my reality is the reality. Yes, but it has to be a little bigger. My reality. And so if I experience my reality, how do I explain? My reality is consciousness. Because it's that which is with me at all times. So if my reality, and if I feel that I am this body, yes, this body is the world. If I feel that I am this body, my reality has to be the reality of this body, and therefore has to be the reality of this universe. Now, my reality is consciousness, experientially. If there is only one reality, it follows that this consciousness and the reality of the world are the same. As I said earlier, Atman is Brahman. The reality of the universe, Brahman, is my reality. Chaitanya, consciousness, is the world. And then everything falls into place. Because then what falls into place is this. If consciousness is universal,
Mhm.
the body of consciousness is the universe. The question then becomes, do I experience the world out there as being my body? Most people will say no, but the newborn child was experiencing it that way. This was a natural experience. So in a sense, our default state, our natural state, our sahaja state, is one in which the world is our body. Our body is also our body, but the world is our body. You see? And the goal of all the yogas, as far as the body is concerned, is to realign the way we perceive the world and the body to reach this experience that the world is my body, the absence of separation. It's for instance, in the Raja Yoga, the stages are Pralaya and Dhyana. Pralaya is a dissolution of what? Of the apparent and illusory border that separates the body from the world. When this border dissolves, Pralaya, then we are in meditation. That's jhana. We are in our natural state. So, in a sense, there is a work to be done, even after we understand we have this experience of liberation, which is a result of the investigation. How do I know that consciousness is limited? How do I know that consciousness is separate? When we are open to the possibilities that consciousness is universal, then there is work to be done to realign the way we perceive the world and the body, and to align the way we think about ourselves.
Yeah.
To make these thoughts and these perceptions consistent with this extraordinary possibility that consciousness is universal. And that's what you find in all traditions. In fact, the founders of all true traditions came from the same experience. The experience of the Buddha, the experience of Lao Tzu, the experience of Ramana Maharshi, or Shankaracharya, or Gaudapada, or Meister Eckhart, or Rumi. All these are different expressions in different cultures of the same reality. The beauty of the Indian tradition is that it is there, black and white, clearly expressed in the Indian scriptures. Whereas in the West, the truth has been kind of hijacked by religion, by belief system. It's less philosophical. It's hidden because it would have been very dangerous in the past to be open about the truth. We would have been burned at the stake or would have been killed, So the beauty of Indian scripture, not all of them, of course, but most of them, is that it is there for all to see. It is there because it is accepted there. It is part of the culture.
Beautiful explanation. Thank you so much for that. I also wanted to move forward and talk to you about ego. This is a topic that is very popular amongst our viewers. Everybody asks about it. And I would want to ask you, how would you guide someone to look beyond ego without turning it into a psychological struggle?
Or the first, there is a confusion. I don't like the word ego. I rarely use it because ego suggests that there is an entity that we have to get rid of. In other words, that there is something real that needs to be killed, that needs to be transformed somehow, that it's like we are possessed by some demon, or some little devil,
Yeah, devil.
that you have to find it, and that you have to kill it. And that's wrong. And then that when that happens, this little devil dies, and we become instantaneously, we become something else, right?
Yeah.
And we are free. The problem with this is that, and that the ego is the little devil or this separate entity. My teacher once said, there is not one single separate entity in the cosmos. In other words, the ego, as considered such, is a myth. It has never existed. So you cannot kill something which doesn't exist. So in the Indian tradition, we have the word avidya. It is usually translated by ignorance, but it is a very specific meaning of the word ignorance. It doesn't mean at all. In other words, it's a technical term for the pundits, because it doesn't mean that we don't know how to count, that we don't know how to read, how to write, how to drive a car, how to speak languages. It's not this kind of ignorance. It's not the ignorance of someone who's not attended any school.
Yeah.
It means the ignorance of the true nature of consciousness.
Yes.
The ignorance of the unlimited and universal and divine nature of consciousness. That's what it means. So, as a result, ignorance is not a thing. It is kind of a misunderstanding. It is a misunderstanding that, let me use a metaphor for that, an image. Ignorance is a false belief, the belief to be a separate consciousness. It's like the belief that Santa Claus exists. In the West, we believe in Santa Claus, right? And as children, and there come a moment, perhaps when we are 5 or when we are 25, that we realize that Santa Claus never existed.
Yeah.
It is when we realize that Santa Claus doesn't exist, it is not that we have killed Santa Claus. So in this image, Santa Claus is the ego, right? Ignorance is the belief that Santa Claus exists.
Yeah.
Liberation is what takes place when we realize that Santa Claus never existed.
But the ego never existed. What a beautiful metaphor, yeah.
That a separate entity never existed, you see? So that's where the word ignorance or the word avidya is a much better choice than ego. Ego ego means separate being. In India, we have the expression jiva. To a certain extent, that is true, because this body, this mind, is a kind of individualized object, just as there is this body, there is this mic, there is this computer, yes. So in that sense, there is an individual vehicle, if you will, but we are the driver of the vehicle. We are the one looking from within toward the outside, but we are not the vehicle.
Thank you for that explanation. It really does make sense because kind of just the term ego, you're right, it kind of puts you in that, it kind of locks you in for something that is not even there in the first place. So it's yeah, I'm thank you for that. I also wanted to ask you, In your view, is enlightenment a singular moment, or would you say it is the timeless recognition of what was never absent? And how do we distinguish between a genuine glimpse of the self and an experience generated by the mind?
These are two questions. So
Yeah.
I would start with the second one.
Okay.
When my teacher went to India, he was a truth seeker.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, he met his teacher in Bangalore. And one day, about 6 months after this meeting with his teacher, the realization came to him that whatever he means,
Mm-hmm.
had changed much more over the last 6 months than over the 40-some years since his birth. And the thought came to him, I must have met a real guru to have triggered such a tremendous or a momentous change in such a short time period. You see, in 6 months, much more than over 40 years. And so that's one sign of that a glimpse has happened. There are symptoms. And sometimes the first glimpse it is not noticed by the mind. It doesn't leave traces in memory. It's like earthquakes. You may have a little tremor and you are in bed and you're asleep and you don't realize it, but the tremor was there.
Yeah.
And the next day, there is a magnitude 7 earthquake, and the little tremor was a little announcement of what was to happen. But in the case of the glimpse, we don't necessarily know when the first glimpse happened. You see, something which is certain is that if a truth seeker is earnest and seeks a teacher, and if the teacher is authentic,
Mm-hmm.
and even if you assume that this student has not had a glimpse, but if his desire is pure, upon meeting the teacher, that will happen. Now, as I said, the mind doesn't necessarily recognize it. It is like the earthquake I was talking about may have already, this first tremor, may have created a leak in the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And then the wind, the rain, subsequent earthquakes, and sooner or later, the entire building is going to collapse. You see? It takes time. It takes time. But glimpse after glimpse, once there is a first glimpse, there will be more and more and more glimpses. The sixth patriarch of Zan in China, Wei Neng, he said somewhere in the Platform Sutra, once a first, he called it samadhi. Once the first samadhi has happened, the first liberating glimpse has happened,
Mm-hmm.
it will be followed by as many glimpses as there are grains of sand on along the Ganga River.
Mm.
You see, it's kind of a nuclear reaction where a first disintegration then triggers a chain, an exponential chain of disintegration. It's the same. The first glimpse, then there is going to be another one, then another one, then pop, 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 pop.
Wow.
You see? So we don't know. But at some point, we realize, either in hindsight, like my teacher said after 6 months, or just there are glimpses that instantaneously after the revelation, boom, the body is completely transformed, is complete. You experience a peace and a happiness which has no cause, a joy which has no cause. Things become obvious, the reality of consciousness shines. And of course, at some point, the changes that are brought about by this revelation in the body-mind vehicle becomes blatant, becomes obvious in hindsight, if we compare that to what the situation was 5 years ago.
Wow. Thank you for that. That does really make sense. Francis, you often speak about the deep link between silence and beauty. I wanted to ask you,
the link between
silence and beauty. How can creative people access that deeper intelligence or stillness?
Then the silence we talk about is not the silence of the world, which is the absence of sound. It's not the silence of the mind, which is an absence of thought or perception, because basically only a corpse has this kind of silence. It is the background of all sound and of all perceptions. It is the Turiya, it is a pure consciousness. In the pure absence of perceptions, no time elapses, because to have the elapsing of time, we require events. Time and space is that which separate events. Right? Events can be separated either by time and by space. It is so. We need events. We need perceptions to have the experience of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I've lost my train of thoughts again.
No worries. Yeah, no, I was asking how would you say?
Yes, the beauty. Yes. So the artistic inspiration through art comes from this place of pure awareness, of pure consciousness. And whatever comes from that place has a special quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
It is as if it had implicitly the signature of its noble origin. And so when we hear it, see it, the nobility of whatever is perceived resonates with our own nobility, resonates with our own divinity. And the way it does, because it comes from that source, it takes us back to the source. And that's where the aesthetic pleasure or joy or satisfaction comes, the beauty is not in the beheld. The beauty is in the beholder. So the work of art or the beauty of nature or the beauty of an event, the beauty of a gesture or of an action, take us to our own beauty. You see, it kind of resonates with our own beauty. It's only because it comes from the right place that it takes us to the right place. And that's why, for instance, in the Indian tradition, it is said that the mantra, the sacred word, has to be given by the guru. But it's because it has to come from the right place to go to the right place. It's like if someone tells you, I love you.
No.
You see? Or the little child, you know, the uncle gives the little child a present. Yeah. And the mother say, Johnny, say thank you to Uncle Charlie. And Johnny goes, thank you, Uncle Charlie. You see?
It's not coming from the right place, yeah.
Yeah. And so we know that, you know, but if it comes from the right place, in a sense, it doesn't matter what is said. Is a little child, you know, upon receiving the present, you know, smiles and look at Uncle Charlie, you know, like that. That's a thank you. That's a thank you from the heart, right? And so it's the same there. In order to be touched, it has to come from the right place. So that's the difference between the pandit and the guru. Is a pandit, you know, he can give you all the logical explanations, you know, and all the theories. But if it doesn't come from the right place, you know, a smile of the guru will do a much better job than lengthy explanation about the Bhagavad Gita. You see, that's yeah. There is a, in the Indian tradition this story about King Janaka and his guru Ashtavakra. Mm-hmm. And one day, King Janaka asks his guru to explain to him what does it mean, the power of the mantra, you know? And so they are in the royal palace, and there are guards around, and Ashtavakra says, guards, arrest the king. And mm-hmm. the guards go, they don't move, you know? Yeah. And the king, Janaka, he gets angry. What? And he says, guards, arrest Ashtavakra. Immediately the guards take hold of Ashtavakra. And Ashtavakra says, see, that's the explanation. We said the same words, you and I. Mine were not efficient. I am not the king. Yours were. Your words came from the right place.
Such a beautiful explanation. It is truly something else when it comes from the right place. I truly agree with that. Francis, you often speak about about spiritual life and grace in spiritual life. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about grace in spiritual life and non-dual realization.
Okay. Grace, when we understand, as long as we believe to be a separate entity, we are separate from God. And God, at some point, gives us her grace. There is a story in another Indian scripture, the Tripura Rasya. And the story goes that this, I'm paraphrasing, but that this guy has been a devotee, lifetimes after lifetime, praying to God. And the goddess, and the goddess after lifetimes of this guy, bothering her like a salesman coming, or a Jehovah's Witnesses coming at your door again and again every Sunday, at some point she says, okay, have mercy on him, and I'm going to send him a teacher of Advaita.
Mm.
You see?
Yeah.
In other words, the moment of grace is when that happens, but that's a poetic view. In fact, the one who is the giver of the grace and the one who receives the grace are the same. You see? So it's only in ignorance to some extent that we see grace, because we believe to be a recipient of grace, right, which is bestowed upon us. But the real grace is the one that kills the belief that we are the recipient of grace.
No. Wow. What a beautiful way to explain it. Yes. Yeah.
You see?
That's true.
That's a real grace. And the spiritual life, precisely, we can have, it could be said that all beings seek God because all beings seek happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And what God is the experience of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that they seek it, most of them, in the wrong place.
Yeah.
In objects, in attachments, etc. Some of them, at some point, and that's already a grace, have this intuition of a reality that is not an object. But they see this reality as separate from them.
Mm-hmm.
You see? But they see, at the same time, they have the experience that what they are seeking, this happiness they have a fleetingly experience, cannot be found in the world. And they have this intuition of a reality,
Mm-hmm.
and that's God, if you will, of a reality that they have a fleetingly kind of seen, but not well enough, so that they feel that they're a separate person. And that's the beginning of the spiritual path. It could be said that it is the path to the path, because on the path to the path, we still believe to be a separate entity. We are different from the one who is exclusively seeking the world, right? We have this intuition of something behind the world, and we are seeking that. In a sense, we have, at that level, we have become a mystic, or we have become a religious person.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the word religion is the same word as the word yoga. It means to connect. And so we have become a yogin, or a spiritual person, or a religious person. We seek the reunion with the divine. And then there is a moment of the glimpse, mukti, the revelation. And this revelation is simply the glimpse of the non-separation between us and God, that we have never been separate. And at that moment, we are liberated. We become in India what they call a Jivan Mukta. And then there is a sadhana. Even after that, that's the real path. The first path is the path to the path. That's the path of the mystic. And then there is a path to wisdom, from mukti, from the liberation, to being stable in this in this realization. And but then this path is joyful. This path, life becomes the field of experimentation, if you will. And as we conduct all these experiments, all the what we call all the leftovers of ignorance, although ignorance has been killed in the glimpse, the leftovers are there, still hang around for some times. And in the Indian tradition, they have also a beautiful, or we have, because it's my tradition, we have this beautiful analogy of the rope which has been burned. And when the rope has been burned, the cylindric shape of the rope may subsist for some time. But this rope has lost its physical properties to, for instance, you cannot do anything with it, right? Yeah. But there seems to be a rope, but if you blow onto it, it disappears. It was only ashes. So the moment of liberation, the glimpse, instantaneously burns the rope. That remains are the ashes, but for a while they seem to be still a rope. But glimpse after glimpse, it's like a blowing here and there on the and at the end, nothing remains of it. Wow. So that's the path. That's the last stretch, if you will, on the path. After the glimpse, there is still a sadhana. There is still the Raja Yoga, the yoga of the king, the yoga of the liberated ones, which is simply the cooperation of the body-mind instrument to its own purification, to its own realignment with the truth that has been revealed.
Francis, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation.
It was good to talk to you.
And I can't wait to share your wisdom with our viewers. So thank you so much once again.